Hello, I'm Ryan Bowl, a Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, a Rain company. This podcast is brought to you by Stratfor Worldview, Rain's premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Special subscription rates for podcast listeners can be found at stratfor.com/podcast offer.
Welcome to the Essential Geopolitics podcast from Stratfor, a Rain company. I'm Emily Donahue. In the wake of January 6th unrest and attacks on the U.S. Capitol building, President Trump has been banned either temporarily or indefinitely on several social media sites. Meanwhile, Parler, a popular social media platform for Trump supporters, was blocked by Google, Apple, and Amazon. Although Democrats have supported the removal, there are First Amendment concerns, and that has brought into focus the power that large U.S. tech firms have consolidated. For guidance, I turn to Matthew Bay, Senior Global Analyst for Stratfor. Hi, Matthew.
Hello, Emily.
This appears to be setting up as a major constitutional issue for President-elect Joe Biden. How might he handle the reaction and the growing clout of technology firms in his administration?
Yes, this is, as you noted, a move that has been positively looked at by some of the Democrats, basically arguing that the move should have been made earlier based on the president's previous statements. But we also have to keep in mind that the Democratic Party and really the Republicans as well have all been looking at the power of these tech companies moving forward. For example, we had an antitrust case that was launched against Google and Alphabet late last year. We've had a couple of other cases that have been brought up against companies like Facebook, etc. And meanwhile, the Democrats in the House in October, they unveiled essentially a strategy paper questioning the dominance of these large tech companies. So I do think that we are going to see the Biden administration just look at ways to strip down some of that power through increased regulations. It's not really going to be clear whether or not these are going to be legislative or otherwise, but clearly there is bipartisan support to go after these companies. Now, there's not necessarily agreement on how to do that, but there's clearly going to be some movement on that in the next 4 years.
Given past limitations of U.S. antitrust investigations against tech companies, how successful should we expect some of these legal pushes to be?
Right. So antitrust law here in the United States, and some of the cases that have been brought up against, say, companies like Microsoft in the past, have really only dealt a glancing blow to tech companies. And there is a question as to whether or not some of the specifics in the way that U.S. antitrust law currently is legislated and also is implemented from the court system is something that can actually tackle the way that tech companies have actually evolved, particularly companies like Amazon, Google, and Apple. One of the big defining characteristics of the U.S. system when it comes to antitrust law has been around doing harm to consumers. And since a lot of these companies offer their services for free, there is a question as to whether or not that actually then harms U.S. Consumers' interests. And you'll have to prove that in court to some degree in order to make that kind of an implication. Now, some people have argued, and this is something that they might have gained traction on, that things like giving access to data, which is really what powers Amazon, Google, and Apple, it's potentially the giving up of data is a cost to the consumer, and that is something that can then be making an argument that the tech companies are actually causing some level of harm from an economic standpoint to consumers. But when we take all of that into account, you're probably not going to see, at least under current law, something more than a glancing blow to these companies as well. While you might have aspects of a company being split off where you might require some specific issues around not having a service that is essentially operating a platform selling its own products. So, for example, Amazon is not necessarily selling Amazon Basics products on their website. You're still likely to see some sort of an evolution in the way that the U.S. wants to treat antitrust issues, and that is likely to come through legislative action.
Matthew, given the current and past political differences between Democrats and Republicans, is it possible that the parties could agree on some of the changes through legislation?
That's going to be a very sticky issue that I think the upcoming Congress and then of course after 2022, the next Congress is going to have to tackle. The Republicans, for example, have long typically tried to shield some of the impacts of significant antitrust concerns on breaking down big business. That is something that might shift around the tech sector because the tech sector is one of the sectors that the Republicans have viewed as being biased against them. The Democrats, of course, have long tried to strip away some of the strength of bigger and large big businesses. So there is going to be a significant disagreement on how to actually implement some of these changes. And I think that there's going to be some deal making around that. And ultimately, that might be something that actually, blunts the actual impact of some of these kinds of potential legislative changes that we might have in targeting the tech sector.
Matthew Bay is a senior global analyst for Stratfor Rain Company. Thanks, Matthew, for that guidance.
You're welcome.
If you would like to read more about this topic, sign up for Stratfor's free newsletter at worldview.stratfor.com. That's worldview.stratfor.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.